Tucker Carlson has continued his tirades and his discussions around why you really shouldn't be as pro-Ukraine as you really are. Now, we talked about in the past segment, I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know why he chose to make this one of his issues, but pretty much since the very beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he's been at least casting doubt on the support of Ukraine, or explicitly saying, why should I support Ukraine? I'm on the side of Russia, or complimenting Putin in weird ways. Well, this time he's taking the opportunity to criticize Zelensky after Zelensky called on other nuclear nations to make clear what their response would be to a Russian nuclear attack. And so if you missed it, pretty much Putin came out and said, listen, if anyone's threatening nuclear weapons, you better be careful because, and then what he's alluding to is we could do it as well. And it seemed to be a pretty obvious threat that, listen, Russia has nuclear weapons and we're willing to use them type moment. And so then Biden's response was kind of, I'm not going to tell you what our response would be. This was in a 60 Minutes interview, and we haven't heard a clear layout of what the response would be if nuclear weapons started being used in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So Zelensky is saying, I want y'all to outline what your response would be, presumably to discourage Putin from using them, right? Because if you make clear a dramatic response you would take, maybe he wouldn't do it. Now, I honestly don't know what the proper strategy would be, but you'll see here Tucker Carlson and his guests wildly misrepresent what Zelensky said and make some weird and incorrect analysis about the situation.
Colonel Doug Macgregor, virtually alone among American military analysts, understood the potential consequences of this war the very first day, the day it started. He was attacked for that. We're honored to have him join us tonight. Doug Macgregor, thanks so much for coming on. If Zelensky is demanding that we preemptively nuke Russia, you would expect someone in Washington to say, whoa, 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 that's crazy talk. But I don't hear anyone saying that.
Well, there are a couple of things at work.
So you just, when you're watching a situation like this, don't forget that if it feels weird to you and seems like something that never happened and it's coming out of Tucker Carlson's mouth, you're probably right. Zelensky didn't say preemptively nuke Russia. No.
First of all, almost from the very first moment that the Russians moved into eastern Ukraine, a succession of retired generals and political hacks in Washington and London and elsewhere have been declaring imminent victory for Ukraine. 7 months later, and the Ukrainian army is bled white. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops have been killed or wounded. Ukraine is really on the ropes and trying to create the illusion that that's not the case. At the same time, Vladimir Putin has finally concluded that he can't negotiate with Kyiv, that the real...
Okay, we'll let it continue because this is just, 2+ minutes of true insanity. But this is the same person who's talking right now with Tucker Carlson, who right before the news came out that Ukraine was making massive advances and was getting a lot more successful in their military goals than they were previously, he made the prediction that the war is going to be over possibly by this weekend, and it's looking horrible for Ukraine. And then boom, we got news that Ukraine was actually doing a lot better. And it's just such an embarrassing moment for this guy, and yet he's still being brought on to give his analysis and to pretend like the facts on the ground are different than they actually are.
Problem is, of course, Washington, and that Washington will not negotiate with him. So he's opted for partial mobilization, bringing in additional forces, ostensibly for the purpose of ending this thing. And at the same time, he's very aware, as any of us are who are in the defense community in Washington, that there's been a lot of loose talk for several months about the viability of waging a limited nuclear war against Russia using the so-called tactical nuclear weapon. And this sort of thing is very frightening to the Russians. They've made it very clear that their use of nuclear weapons is limited to retaliatory strikes in the event that we or someone else strikes them. So they just wanted to reaffirm clearly.
Okay, so we'll stop it there. But you can see everything is framed through the Russia is the victim lens, right? And, this is not Putin bringing the conversation of nuclear weapons into this as a possibility by constantly reminding people that Russia has nuclear weapons and he is the aggressor. No. This is Putin just saying, listen, you guys keep threatening us and we might have to use nuclear weapons in response. Now, to be clear, since the very beginning of this conflict, Putin has been the one bringing up nukes. Very early on, he said, listen, any threats from the West, he wasn't necessarily talking about nuclear. He said nuclear or otherwise, just you taking part, supporting Ukraine might cause us to have to retaliate in some way, which could be nuclear. And so he's the one who keeps threatening this. And we all understand that Western countries aren't just going to nuke another country all of a sudden. That would be just unfathomable. That's not a thing that's going to happen. But Russia is the one who does seem to be way more loose with what the requirements would be for them to feel like that is justified. And we understand that because Ukraine is doing a lot better right now in the war, and because they've made advances, Putin might be getting desperate and want to start using those tactical nukes, which, as we've discussed before, if you missed it, when I hear nuclear weapon, I'm picturing eviscerate an entire city type image. These tactical nukes are a little bit smaller scale, but still massively devastating. But that's what's being discussed. So to read about what actually happened with this Zelensky news, let's see here, reading from Newsweek, a senior aide to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is urging the United States to flesh out specific retaliatory measures if Russia were to invoke nuclear strikes against Ukraine. And then Biden said the United States is ready to pursue critical arms control measures and nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. So I think it's clear that no one on the Ukrainian side or the West's side is just wanting to use a nuke all of a sudden to take out Russia. But if Russia is seriously considering using nuclear weapons, then I think it's fair to say, what is the response going to be from the West? What is the response going to be from people supporting Ukraine? Now, I think we have to do everything possible to avoid some sort of nuclear conflict, especially in any hypothetical world where a Western country and Russia get in a nuclear conflict. That's just, world-ending type stuff. So that can't be one of the options until the very, very, very last second. But I understand why the question is there on the part of the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian leadership, and Zelensky.